Alright, here we go. World War II. It's the good war, don't you know? Of course, we're going to be talking about some aspects of it that aren't so wonderful from a human rights perspective. And we also, by the end of this thing, are going to drop a couple atomic bombs on Japan. So, it's good, and then it's got some dark sort of undertones to it. Moving very quickly through all of this stuff. We're going to talk about how we get into the war. We're going to talk about the war at home. And then in about 4 slides, we're going to do combat real quickly. I assume some of you know the story already. All right, choosing sides. Let's start with a different idea on World War I and World War II. Nye is a senator from North Dakota. In between the wars, right, he does this investigation through the Senate and calls war basically a capitalist tool. It's for bankers. And then also remember the Dawes plan that the debts from World War I are really important in the build-up to World War II. So there's this sense sort of that maybe for some people on the Great Plains and for some Americans that it's not our problem and it's just a capitalist issue, this war. So that's in the backdrop. We have Japan starting World War II in some ways. They invade Manchuria in 1931, so that's a backdrop for the war's aggression in the East. And I love what they call it, the Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere, right? They're not imperialists, they're just helping everybody out. The United States responds to growing hostilities around the globe with a couple of different acts that kind of mirror what we did in World War I. But by the time we get to 1939, we are definitely lending arms, we are selling arms. As long as they come and get them, we're trying to keep out of the sort of submarine crisis that got us into World War I. So there's a sense that we don't really want to get in the war, but then we're leaning towards a certain side. The stuff that's been happening in the background, Hitler's been expanding, Nazi Germany. This is Neville Chamberlain, famously at the Munich conference. He appeases Hitler, and he says all he wants is the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia because they're German-speaking people. Anyway, we talk about aggression. I mean, not aggression. We talk about appeasement a lot in the news, talking about you can't appease terrorists, right? And it's always this reference to Hitler, and usually it doesn't apply that well, but it's a big historical cliche. Anyway, Hitler does attack. He invades Poland. He invades France. France falls by June of 1940. So this is before the United States is even in the war, right? And then FDR says, all right, we are going to eventually probably get in this thing. So he starts moving into war footing. Unlike Wilson, he gives us 4 freedoms: freedom from fear, freedom from want, freedom of speech, and freedom of worship. And I love this, right? Blue collar dude standing up. This is America. This is democracy. Everybody gets their own say. We even have Catholics with their rosary beads in here. So moving on, we start lending and leasing war materials to the British. They're running out of money. And there is some opposition to this in Congress, right? Not everybody's willing to put the U.S. on this kind of war footing, but we do start doing it. Over time, it's a whole lot of money. It's anything that FDR authorizes, $7 billion. That's a lot of cash money, as you guys know. And it goes all around the world. Enough about that. All right. So we also agree to a military strategy, even though we haven't entered the war. We're cognizant of the Philippines. Remember that little excursion, the Spanish-American War. And then we've got Pearl Harbor. We also got Douglas MacArthur with his corncob pipe and his high-rise jeans, khakis, I suppose. Okay, Atlantic Charter, we get with Wilson. We're talking about the final destruction of Nazi tyranny. And again, this is before declaration of war. So what do we get? We get Pearl Harbor. All right, a horrible event in human history, a horrible event in American history. But it also gives a darn good reason to enter World War II. So this isolationism, this sense that war is about bankers and capitalism, that gets washed out with Pearl Harbor, and all of a sudden the United States is united in their decision to fight the Axis evil, right, of Germany, Italy, and Japan. Germany had spread into Moscow. There's a whole story there we're going to absolutely skip. They'd invaded Norway for some strange reason, and so all of this territory is German territory. Down here is Vichy France, which is also German territory. All right, now we're part of the war. There's other stuff that's happening. What are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about unconditional surrender. This happens at Casablanca, and then later on Truman, after FDR dies, applies it to Japan, which is part of the reason why we dropped the bomb. So it's kind of a big deal. What else do we got? We got the invasion of North Africa. That's kind of fun. Okay, to the home front. This is a lot of people. Total population, 135 million. Total workforce, 73 million. That's like more than half the country, right? Lots of people are employed that weren't employed before. It moves the country's population around. It really booms in California and on the Pacific Coast. We build lots of things. We're the arsenal of democracy. All right, what else we got? Oh, I love this image, right? Look at all these freaking bombers, man. That's just one plant. But, yeah, that's American industrial might put to use. Part of putting all that industrial might to use is reducing domestic consumption, because America's producing a bunch of things they didn't produce before. We start in 41. It's kind of a public relations error, but by the time you get into the war proper, there's an Office of Price Administration set up. Now let's look at this for just a little while. This is the boss of the Office of Price Administration, Leon Henderson, and this is a chart of prices from World War I. Note, boom, they're super high, they get higher, and then there's immediate collapse after World War I. So what we're trying to do is not have the super inflation and quick depression that happened following World War I. So there's good precedent for this from a historical standpoint. We ration a whole lot of different items. Everything that was on the ration list, you had to have a little coupon. You had to have a little coupon book to buy the rationed items. And you had little stamps that you traded in for the items. One thing we're going to talk about is meat. There's barely enough meat for demand, right? And so you have a black market that's outside of rationing. It's a little complicated, but basically there's a system that tries to limit the amount of meat that Americans consume so that we can have enough meat for our soldiers. There's a fear that there's these Gestapo housewives, right, who are coming into people's businesses and spying on them for the government. And of course the OPA says, no, we don't have this. And I just love this image. Fur coat, right? We always go to the butcher in our fur coats, don't we? Wearing our gloves. And of course they're having a darn good time, aren't they? All right, moving on. In the United States during World War II, the Republicans and the Conservatives come back into power a little bit. They'd gone out of sway during the New Deal. We get rid of the Works Progress Administration, Civilian Conservation Corps, and then it's felt in the OPA. This is rationing, and so we get rid of a New Dealer and we bring in a businessman. And Congress declares that OPA policymakers have to have business experience. And what this shows is a shift in American politics back from the state being a large apparatus for lots of different functions to letting business come back into power a little bit more. Remember in the 20s, business was everything. And then in the 30s, during the Great Depression, state management took its position as sort of the dominant view. Then in World War II, there's a lot of state management because we're fighting this massive war, right? But it starts to shift. Another thing that happens is civil rights. boy, I'm not going to be able to get through all this. So real quickly, A. Philip Randolph, remember our homeboy from the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters? I shouldn't call him a homeboy, sorry about that. He threatens a march on Washington, but FDR bans discrimination in defense industries. There's a double V campaign, right? African Americans are fighting overseas and they want democracy at home. NAACP jumps in membership. That's kind of important, isn't it? But at the same time, we're putting Japanese Americans, citizens, into, I'm going to say it, concentration camps, right? We take these individuals, the Supreme Court says it's okay, you can do this, and we put them in internment camps in the West so that they can't help an invasion of the Pacific Coast, right? There's one over here, Hard Mountain in Wyoming. Maybe you guys know about that place. Not a very beautiful part of the American experience, but during war we sometimes sacrifice our civil liberties for a sense of security. Combat. Okay, you saw that great German advance. Well, the Russians had started pushing in from the Eastern Front. The Americans finally open a Western Front. They open a small front in Italy before this, but then on June 6, 1944, there's a massive landing on D-Day. I hope you all have seen Saving Private Ryan. That's pretty fun, isn't it? Dwight David Eisenhower is the commander of all the Allied forces. It's a tiny little toehold at first. There's massive deception. Remember Hitler's invasion of Norway? He had this sort of, what do you want to call it? An Aryan fetish, right? And so we created a diversion plan. The Allies created a diversion plan that said they were going to invade Norway first. It didn't make any sense except for Hitler thought it made sense, so it made sense to Hitler. And they also had one that was going to the port of Calais, and then they had one that was going into Normandy. Patton was in command of this entire fake army filled with balloon tanks. It's really quite an interesting story. So anyway, massive deception. There were 6 panzer divisions in northern France. Hitler could have rolled the thing up fairly easily, but he thought it wasn't the real invasion. So very quickly we go from tiny little footholds to larger and larger holdings on the coast of Normandy. Russian army is pushing in. They go from here to here. We go from here to here. You kind of get the idea. Wham bam, war is over. Yay, much rejoicing. In the Pacific, there's 2 different attack plans. One going up into the Philippines to retake that American colony. Remember that? And then another to the north. Here's Japan. First to establish bombing bases so that we could bomb Japan, and then finally to set up an invasion of the homeland that never comes because we dropped a couple atomic bombs on them, as you guys are well aware. So I think we're going to call that good. I hope you enjoyed our whirlwind tour of World War II. And let's see. Yeah, we'll just call it good. Have fun out there.